Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. So first, before I start today's content, I wish to express my condolences to the loss of life that occurred during the recent terrorist attack that occurred just outside of Moscow. Again, my great condolences to those that were affected by that attack. Now, today we are continuing, obviously, to analyze the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Over the past 24 hours, there has been a fairly moderate uptick in escalation. We have seen the Ukrainians strike at a variety of targets in Crimea, specifically Sevastopol. We have seen possibly Russian command nodes and surface warfare vessels, landing vessels, amphibious warfare vessels, possibly being struck by Ukrainian cruise missiles. Now, this attack that we have seen in Sevastopol and other areas of Crimea have all the hallmarks of a Western North Atlantic Treaty Organization designed strike. The attack again went after what is believed to be satellite communications nodes with the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Now, through video evidence, we have seen what appears to be Storm Shadow cruise missiles, British supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles being launched at targets against Sevastopol. Now, we have also seen the Russians shoot down some of these cruise missiles as well. Now, at the same time, we have seen the Russians respond with their own cruise missile and semi-ballistic missile strikes against targets in Lviv and in Kiev. Now, this is going to continue. We are going to see this war slowly mutate into a war of cities, much like we saw during the Iran-Iraq War, but with much greater precision. At the same time, we are getting information that the Russians could be preparing for a very large-scale offensive in the vicinity of Kharkov. Now, the Kremlin leadership has been talking about creating a buffer zone running from essentially Kupiansk all the way to the Belarusian border in this area. Now, some believe that this buffer zone could be in excess of 40 kilometers from the Russian border. If you measure from the Russian border to Kharkiv, however you wish to pronounce it, it's almost exactly 40 kilometers. Now, one would think that if the Russians made a move towards Kharkov, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, that the Russians would also need to create a buffer zone both to the south and to the west of Kharkov as well, extending out another 40 kilometers. Now, the reason for that is I don't believe the Russians would move and take control of Kharkov without pushing the eventual border much further west and south. That would eliminate the possibility of Ukrainian forces being able to strike out at this densely populated city of Kharkov, much like what has happened in Donetsk and even to a limited extent Luhansk. Again, these are battlefield cities that are fairly close to the line of contact that have suffered greatly in the ongoing war. Now, what are the Russians preparing to do near Kharkov? Well, information suggests that the Russians could be preparing a force of up to 300,000 Russian troops to envelop Kharkov, besiege it, and then seek its capitulation. Now, I've talked before that an ending to this conflict, which did not see the retaking of Kharkov, would be a very sour pill indeed for the Russians. Look, Kharkiv has been a traditional Russian city, going all the way back throughout history. Kharkov has been considered Russian. So the likelihood that the Russians would want to reclaim this city, much like it did Sevastopol and the Crimea, is highly likely. Highly likely. And we're seeing the Russians start to put into place the military capability to surround, cut off, besiege, and then seek the capitulation of Kharkov. Now, if the Russians are able to allocate that kind of force towards an area just south of Belgorod, towards Kharkov, it is going to be very difficult, given the Ukrainian challenges centered on manpower, ammunition, and munitions, to try and resist this Russian force. I mean, we're already seeing in areas near Avdiivka. Remember, this map has drastically changed over the last several weeks. Remember, the map, and I'm not going to take you all the way back into history, but the Russian force disposition was east, well east of Avdiivka. And since then, the Russians have taken control of Avdiivka. They have taken control of all the strong points. And furthermore, they have pressed an additional 8 kilometers west of Avdiivka and continue to press forward as well. As we've talked about before, the Ukrainians are having tremendous difficulties in dealing with the Russian use of GLONASS glide bombs. These GLONASS corrected munitions that, while probably not as accurate as, say, a U.S. JDAM, nonetheless, they are causing casualties and causing a great deal of problems for Ukrainian forces. Furthermore, the Russians have started enhanced production of these new 3-ton glide bombs, bigger bombs. So we've seen the Russians use the Fab 500s. We have seen them use the Fab 1500s, 1500 kilograms bombs. And now we're going to see even larger glide bombs being deployed by Russian forces, designed to crack these fortifications that the Ukrainians are attempting to build. The Ukrainians don't have the time nor the resources to completely create long lines of defensive works. They don't have that capability, like the Russians have done during the now defunct Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south of Kyiv, southeast of Zaporizhia. You can see here in this Ukrainian-supported map just how deep and how many lines of defensive fortifications the Russians have established. Ukrainians aren't able to do that. They don't have the time to do that, and the biggest issue for the Ukrainians is the Russian use of ground attack aircraft launching these glide munitions against Ukrainian targets. It's very difficult for the Ukrainians to respond in kind the way the Russians are to the building of these defensive works. The Ukrainians are able to launch a few strikes against highly sensitive targets through the use of the Storm Shadow system, and with the assistance of U.S. and NATO surveillance assets designed to track and identify targets for these Storm Shadows. But the Ukrainians don't have the ability to target in any significant amount Russian forces deployed along the line of contact, wherein the Russian forces have hit, at least this month, they've already hit 1,000 aim points with Fab 500s, 1500s, and now we're starting to see the deployment of these 6,000 pound or 3,000 kilogram GLONASS glide munitions. Now again, what is the end game? Where is this going to end? And I have to wonder, as the war continues, as we see these recent strikes that took place in Crimea, obviously there's going to be ongoing investigations about what occurred in Moscow in that attack. At what point does the leadership in the Kremlin, the military leadership in the Russian military, decide that the Ukrainian state is just something that it cannot deal with at all? Now, I would say on a scale between 1 and 5, 5 being a complete mobilization and the embracing of total war. Right now, the Russians are probably at a 3.5, crossing into the neighborhood of 4 would be further mobilization, quite possibly a deployment of forces necessary to launch another multi-100,000 troop offensive towards Kharkov and possibly other areas as well. But a 5 would be on a completely different scale. That would be the complete mobilization of Russian society to war against the Ukrainian state and its Western allies. That's why we are seeing France, as I've talked about yesterday, position itself for a possible deployment into Ukraine. The Western powers fully understand that if the Russians escalate to that 4 or 5 level, the possibility that the Russians would take control of all of Ukraine is very real. Hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. treasure, of U.S. weapon systems, of Western weapon systems that have been handed over to the Ukrainians. That would be a political nightmare that the neoliberals in charge of these Western countries could not comprehend, nor would they probably, in their minds, allow. Hence, the deployment of those French forces, leading to World War III. That's where we sit. As always, thanks for joining us. We'll have more very, very soon. It's been a pleasure. Have a good day.